Aujourd'hui, je vais parler de, well, actually quite a difficult topic today, as I'd like to talk about what happened to that lady who got shoved in front of a subway track in my hometown of New York City, and I think she died. But more than the incident itself, I want to talk about how that crime's been perceived and talked about. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not here to change anyone's minds. I just want to sort out my own feelings about it, and that's all. And if you're easily offended, please don't watch this clip, okay? Hey, XenPuck here, right? So I have to repeat my background a bit, right? I've spent more time in New York City than any other city in my life. I love the Big Apple. Heck, I love it so much that I actually hate people who speak ill of it, right? Because I think they're just totally idiotic. Yes, so I get very combative about that. Having said that, New York City has its problems, right? It's the biggest city in the USA and probably the densest. And when that many people are on top of each other, well, strange and crappy things happen just as often as wonderful and awesome things, right? So what actually happened is this Asian lady got shoved in front of a subway train by a crazy hobo. Yep, that happened. Okay. But why is this national news? That's what I'd like to digest a bit, right? Because I'm very confused. Her name is Michelle Go. She's a real person. She seems like a wonderful, wonderful human being. Please note, I'm not really talking about this lady specifically, right? Just why did this story get to be in the national conversation instead of any other tragedy? Again, I am obviously Asian, right? So I certainly feel the empathy of my tribe, probably a tinge more than most others, but still I can't help but feel that the story's blown up for very dubious reasons. So let's break it down, right? Number one, right, I'm going to link the article below from a local news source just to talk about a little bit about the details of this particular case, right? It's clearly stated most likely the bad guy here did not have a racial motive, and for two reasons that are stated in the article, right? One, he approached some other ladies and was like threatening them, according to, first-hand witnesses. And two, the victim was wearing a hoodie, so it's unlikely that he actually saw her face, right? I'd also like to add a point 3 here, because it seemed like she shoved her from behind. And recall this just happened, right? It's January in New York City. Honestly, right now with the pandemic, people are presumably wearing masks, and it's January, so they have their coats, kind of poofy, big winter coats on, most likely. I mean, I'd be surprised if this crazy person could tell a dude from a lady outside of, let's say, height, right? So by all sense of logic, it seems like a random crime, especially because the assailant is someone who's been reported as having mental health issues. Ah, great. So he's not even an unknown. He's a known bad and crazy person, a repeated known bad and crazy person, and finally he took a life. What an a-hole. But still, at least he was not being a racist a-hole in this instance, right? I mean, isn't that the slightest of silver linings in the grand scheme of tragedies? So why did this become national level news again? I'm seriously confused. The motivation, by all measures, don't seem racial, right? Right from the article, but also one single logical deduction, right? My point number 2. So really, I'm curious, how is this case different than all the rest, right? Once again, I'm really afraid I'm going to sound callous, but the reality is that people get shoved into the subway tracks like literally every year in New York City. It doesn't always end up being a fatality, by the way, but it does happen. Yes, I absolutely would assume just getting shoved into the tracks would be like one of the scariest things that could possibly happen to anyone, right? But it does happen, and it is usually the result of crazy people, right? Not like, I don't think anyone's trying to murder each other via pushing them down the subway tracks. It's just not very efficient, right? I know I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be able to say crazy hobos, but I'm using it because I'm sorry, I have sympathies for lots of different kinds of people, but I have to draw the line somewhere, and the line for me are people who hurt other people for any or no reason, right? Mental health issues is not an excuse, right? Because I have to go off on a tangent and talk about my preferred punishment is very simple, eye for an eye, right? I don't care why this person hurt someone else or what was going through their mind, because they really just don't deserve to live after snuffing out one other life, right? That's all, full stop. Again, I want to mention, this type of incident though has happened every year since I was a kid. Okay, a quick search tells you that at least in the last couple of years, it averages about 1 a month. Okay, yeah, and frankly, we don't hear anything about any of them outside like the local paper. I don't even think subway shovings make real local news. We're talking about like the paper. Maybe it's still in the papers, right? I've heard about this type of things happening since I was a kid riding the subway by myself. Like I started when I was 15, so that's more than 20 years ago, right? So they're all tragedies, no doubt, and I'm sure most of the affected are perfectly lovely people, but why then does this most recent one become national news? Why don't we even hear about, any of the victims, let's say, during the last pandemic years? Once again, I don't have the answer, but I do feel like the spread of this incident is really mostly because of identity politics at its worst, right? Why does the race of the duo matter, like victim and assailant, right? Especially for the kind of incidents, again, 20 years of me reading the local paper tells me it happens all of the time, right? I get there's an anti-Asian hate trend recently because of the moronic orange douche that some 40% of the country voted for. But yeah, but not everything has to do with race, right? Right, the pandemic, or even the orange douche, was only the last like 5 years or so. But I mean, I've been familiar for New York City, on New York City for like more than 2 decades, okay? This happens all the time, and it's never a racial thing. It's usually like a crazy homeless person, okay? So my personal reaction is that of horror, but it would have been the same no matter what the race of victim or perpetrators would have been. Why would anyone else feel differently, right? Like, how does the race matter, whether it's black on black, or Asian on Asian, or black on Asian, or white on, like, what does it matter? I'm honestly very, very confused. Like, how did this grow from crazy person doing something to a normal person to like a race thing still, right? And finally, okay, so tragedy happens. I've already gone over why I don't think it's racial, but maybe it's being elevated in the national discourse because apparently we are now unsure about the safety of New York City's subway system, right? After all, the pandemic means that more people have been going into suspect financial circumstances, maybe because there's less outreach program and therefore more crime by those apparently, helpless, crazy folks. Once again, anyone who's ever lived in New York City are aware that subway shovings do happen, and often. That's why you can't wear, let's say, noise-canceling earphones on the subway platforms and should always be scanning your environment every minute, or lean against a pole or something and make sure your footing's secure. Basically, advice that my mom has given me since I was a teenager, right? The same advice that I'd be giving any newcomer to New York City that asked me, right? Does that make the subway specifically sound dangerous? Again, not to me, right? I mean, you do have to pay attention because hundreds of potential crazy peoples will filter by you in a matter of minutes in a busy subway station, especially where this happened, which was Times Square, I believe, right? But at least in a big city, I don't have to worry about, I don't know, serial killers as much as in the burbs, right? Or being mauled by a wolf like in the countryside. So is New York City subway system, is it safe? I mean, it's as safe as a big city's public transport can get, right? And challenges are absolutely there, right? But they are simply different than in a suburban or rural area. But what was so different about this particular tragedy again? Of course a big city is going to be more dangerous than a smaller town, simply due to the fact there are less people in a smaller town, right? But no news item from the past week, month, year, or decade has ever or will ever deter me from loving a city like New York, right? With the glory that comes with people coming together goes the danger that some of us are just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? That's just life. I hope no adults thinks that life is still supposed to be fair or just somehow, right? Okay, my rant's done, right? Condolences again to this lady's family, but I wish someone would explain to me why this lady, out of the dozens or hundreds of people who've been shoved onto the subway tracks in New York City in the last decade or so, why they wouldn't get all this attention. Okay, I'm not asking for a nerf of the current coverage, right? More like a buff for the rest. But the reality is probably that if we hear about this kind of news every month, they would lose that emotional impact, right? Maybe that's why. I mean, please comment below if you have a better explanation. Oh, and share, like, sub, and all that social media nonsense, or whatever, okay? I know some of you also found my support for capital punishment too severe, but honestly, I would like you guys to think about it like this, right? Do I expect this dude, this person who killed this lady, who's apparently a really nice, altruistic lady, do you expect this dude to, you know, at 60-something odd years old to somehow still suddenly change and get better and turn his life around, maybe save some lives, to repent for the one life that he clearly already have taken? That's just the one that we know about. Or do I expect this dude to, you know, somehow get off from going to jail due to his mental state and almost certainly hurt others in the future, right? I mean, seriously, which is more likely to happen, right? Think about that. Anyway, cheers. I'll approach it.